All right, here we go. Live episode 16 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. We had to bring on a journalist for this episode, the one, the only, Cole Shelton. What's going on, sir? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm good, and especially good with my Titan chair, right? Like we two guys that have the office chairs now, and we look like we know what we're doing. I feel like that's the big difference now with this big, powerful chair.
Yeah, compared to your last one, it's a lot better.
That's the thing. Like nobody could see the chair. It was just like either Lucas is hovering in midair, and then I was like, you know what? Let me show people, what was like jumping into my ass every time I tried doing these interviews, so they can understand why I spent a little bit to get a nicer chair.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. If you're sitting in it for a while, you need a good one.
Oh yeah, like when I was doing the live watch alongs with Shaq, like the first time he invited me, I was like, I'm about to do 3 hours sitting on that thing, and then like I got up from that podcast, my back wasn't moving. It was just like I was like, oh man, no, I can't have a chair that's gonna turn me into an old man. I'm too young for that.
Yeah, for sure.
But the crazy thing, man, though, I think you're what? I think you're the first like journalist I've talked to that's younger than I am, which is crazy. I'm used to everyone's like 40 looking at me like, who's this child? But I think we finally found someone younger than I am.
Yeah, and then Nick Baldwin's younger than me by a year, so I still have someone younger than me too. But I'm one of the youngest people for sure.
You feel like that's brought you any advantages? Like I feel like it's brought some, right, and then at the same time there's certain disadvantages too.
Yeah, because like obviously some people are going to be like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about" and whatnot, and then there's other people like Macy Barber is obviously around my age, so that's good. So like before you do interviews, we just talk about stuff that we both know, just because when you have like a 40-year-old talking to her, like they won't know what the heck they're talking about. So like it helps that way with the younger fighters for sure. But then some people are being like, "Why the heck do I want to talk to a 21-year-old? What do they know?"
Yeah, that was the weird thing too, is that you don't know if fighters are gonna like after the interview, if they're done, they're like, I can't believe I just talked to a child, or if they're gonna look at it like, oh, cool, one of the young guys. Vitor Belfort's the one that made me feel weird about it. He was like going on like, you're covering MMA thanks to me and stuff. I could be your dad, and it was like, all right, I don't really know where to go from here. Like, it's like it's always a weird thing. People are like, I'm old enough to be your dad. Why would you say that? Like, just we understand that, but when you say it, like now the rest of the interview, it's like, I'm gonna think of you kind of as my father because you just said some weird shit like that.
Yeah, I haven't had that luckily, but I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's Vitor Belfort. Like, there's like a part of you that has to get through the holy shit. It's Vitor Belfort, and then it's like, I mean, I'm like, yeah, cool. Let's try and move past that weird, you're not my dad thing, and let's, maybe get into some fighting. But, have you ever interviewed Vitor before?
No, I have not.
I feel like he's the guy, like, you can't really talk about fighting with him. Like, every time I try to talk about fighting, he'd go off on something else, and it was like, all right, that's it. This is how the interview is gonna be.
Yeah, I there's some people where there's just like, they so they fight, but then they literally it's like I don't really want to talk about fight. Like Khalil Rancher, have you talked to him before?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, his manager. Whenever I asked to do an interview, they're like, "Yeah, but he doesn't want to talk about his fight." So I'm like, "Okay, never mind then. Like, what am I
Yeah.
supposed to talk to him about?"
That's the crazy, like, fighter. I feel like some of them are like, because I talk to guys sort of behind the scenes. They're like, you guys ask the same questions and stuff, and I'm like, I feel you, but you have to understand why are we doing the interviews? Pre-fight to talk about your fight and hype people up. Post-fight to hype up your win. So if it's like I don't want to talk about fighting, it's like, do people really want to see 10, 15 minutes of, hey man, how's your cat doing? Did you clean your kitchen recently? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you going to talk about in that case? Because what are you promoting if you don't want to talk about your fight?
Yeah, like I just talked to Mike Rodriguez, and we spent basically like half the interview just talking about video games, just
Yeah.
because we did this whole like the like just hyping up the fight, and then it's like I'm just curious about what games he likes. Because I like playing a bunch of video games, so he just started going off on that, and he was giving longer answers about the video games and the fighting.
I had Mike Rodriguez on the podcast, and it was one of those things like, I like to just let it naturally flow and whatever pops up. We barely talked about fighting. He had a fight, and we got to the interview, and he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I have a fight," and it's like I can't believe it didn't pop up. Like, I feel like some fighters they like doing media, but they don't quite understand like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the purpose of this?
Yeah, and they just feel like, oh, I just only have to do an interview with one person, but it's like that's one site. There's like hundreds of sites out there that mostly all of them are going to be hitting you up. So then it's like it's going to be a lot of the same questions, but it's for a bunch of different audiences.
Yeah, some fighters they'll tell you like, "Oh, I already talked about this in another interview," and it's like, are you really gonna sit there and assume everyone's watched every single one of your interviews? Like, how this audience isn't watching for me because I have you on? I mean, I know that's obviously not true, but you know what I mean? It's always weird that I talked about it in another interview. It's like, yeah, no shit, it's a relevant topic. Like I'm trying to keep it interesting, but you gotta meet me halfway.
Yeah, for sure. That's like it, that's the worst when they go, "Oh, like I did it in this interview," and I'm like, "Well, maybe people that read like where I work don't read that website or don't listen to it. Like they don't know."
Yeah, or they'll name like a podcast you never heard of, like, oh, I did this on the, Slipping on the Canvas podcast. Like, I don't know what that is, which means other people probably don't know what that is too. Like, I'm not asking, it's not like a crazy question, like, what do you think of your opponent? Literally everybody's gonna ask you that, and that's because we have to.
Yeah, because you have to do that normal. There's a lot of questions I ask that not many people ask, but then there's also like the same questions like, how do you see it going? Like, well, what you make of your like the opponent's last fight? Like, what do you take away from your last fight if they're coming off a loss or whatnot? Just like those basic ones. But then there's a lot of different ones you can ask too.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I try to tell people, like, because fighters, they'll say before, like, I answer the same questions. Like, I feel you, but you got to understand, like, the boring matchup questions, how you see it going, like, I have to ask that. Like, we're promoting your fight. We have to talk about that topic. It's like, once we get that out of the way, though, depending on how the interview goes, depends on can we get into some more weird stuff or not. Like, with this podcast, we can get into, do you believe in aliens and shit? But in 10, 15 minutes, half the interview can't be, you think you saw a UFO one time, right? Like, we have to talk about the topic at hand.
Yeah, and like even just for titles and stuff, what's going to be better is X fighter says he's going to knock out the like Y fighter, or uh, just some basic like this is what this person cooks or likes to cook or something. Like you have to ask it so you get your title, you get them hyping up the fight, saying, "Oh, I'm going to knock out this guy in a minute," or "I'm going to knock out this guy in the first round," like all that kind of basic titles.
Yeah, exactly. Like I hate the clickbait titles. Hey, yeah, but first of all, it's not clickbait because you did talk about it, but we need people to click on it too. Like, you know how hard it is to get views? Like, I can't just put your face on there. Like, I have to put some a little bit, so and so believes they're going to knock the opponent out, which isn't crazy. I would expect you to knock them out. I mean, Jillian Robertson, I think, is the only fighter that every time she's like, I'm going to go out there and submit you. But most fighters believe they're going to knock them out. So it's not that crazy of a headline.
Yeah, the funniest thing is when I talked to Jillian ahead of the Patello fight, I was like, "Oh, the basically how do you see this fight playing out?" And she goes, "Well, I mean, you already know the answer. Everyone always says, oh, I'm going to knock out the person in the first round, but I'm just going to go out there, take her down as many times as I can, and then eventually she's going to tap. It could be a minute in, it could be at the 14:59. Like, and I'm like, well, yeah, that is your style. Like, at least you're honest. You're not saying like, I'm going to go knock her out, or like she knows
Yeah.
that's how she wins."
And then that's the thing too, like, you're not gonna tell the fighter that, but you'll have someone who has, like, 0 career knockouts, doesn't really knock people down, like, you know what their style is, right? High volume and stuff, and they'll tell you something weird, like, first round knockout. Okay, great, and then in reality, you're thinking like, "Really? Is that real?" I mean, I feel you, but, like, is that realistic? Like, is that really your game when you go out there?
Yeah, there is some bold predictions by some people.
For sure. How old were you when you started doing interviews?
Oh, like 19. I would have been in school, so yeah, 19.
Man, how did you have you seen yourself, like, grow up in these interviews? Like, do you ever listen to, like, some of these old interviews and think like, "Oh my god," like, stuff like that?
Well, I only recently started doing videos and putting it out. Before, it used to be on the phone, so
Yeah.
luckily no one could hear it or hear anything. I have all of them on my old recorder. I could listen back. They're probably terrible because when I first started, I would just have a list of 7 questions and then just read them off one by one. They could say something like so cool, and I would even pay attention. I'm just like, all right, next question.
Well, the thing for me, I did that too, but I was terrified. Like I remember the first interview I did was through Bellator, and I was shaking. I was pacing back and forth. I was like, I sounded like a fighter trying to hype myself up. Like, do you want to do this? Do you want to be legit? This is a part of the game, and I was terrified. So if I didn't have some, like, I had like the intro written out, like, thank you for the time, I appreciate it, and then the outro, thank you, I appreciate it again. Like, because I was like, I'm so scared to do it, and you'd come in, you'd have. I was doing, I think, 8 questions. Then for video, I switched to 12. But you'd like read these questions and they could say something really cool, like you said, and you're like, yeah, but I'm not ready for that because I'm scared as hell. So let's just move on to the next question.
Yeah, like that's the thing is I probably missed so much good stuff in my first couple interviews that I didn't even realize.
Yeah, that's why I heard Ariel Hawani say, like, I don't prepare questions and stuff like that. When I first heard that, I was like, that is terrifying. Like, you just sit down and just talk to the guy. And now today it's like, I can't believe I used to come up with questions like, before the interview. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't even do any questions. There's like topics that I'll make sure I touch on. Like if I see something cool, I'll be like, oh, I have to ask them about that, or I'll just jot down like talk about this just so I can because sometimes I'll just forget while I'm talking, and I'm like, oh, dang, I forgot to talk to them about that. But I don't even do any questions anymore. I It's weird to think that I that's all I used to do is just write down questions, just follow that questions. Didn't matter what they say. It was just even if they answered the next question I was going to ask in that first question, I'd still ask it because it was on my list.
I used to do that too. Even if they answered, I'd still ask it. And then I think it was Amanda Bobby Cooper who was like, "I feel like I already answered that question." And I was like, "Oh shit!" Like this interview just took a turn. Like I don't even know what to do anymore after saying something like that.
Yeah.
What's like the craziest thing like a fighter's told you? Like like have they ever gotten mad at you during an interview or anything like that?
Not that I can remember. I don't think I've really had many bad incidents. Like, luckily, there's probably been some where behind the scenes they were probably mad, but publicly, I don't know any. Like, they haven't said anything to me. They might say something to their manager, or they're like, "I don't want to talk to that guy" or whatever. But none that I know.
That's the scary thing, right? You do an interview and you hope that I always tell people like I hope that when they turn off their phone, I don't even want it to be like, "Oh, that was great" or whatever. Just like, "All right, cool. Turn off your phone. Go about your day." Like I don't want it to be like a big deal like, "Man, I just talked to that fucking dumbass who asked me this and that." Like you always hope it's not a big deal because if it's not a big deal, that's how you know it went well. But they spend the whole rest of the day thinking about that interview, then you're like maybe something wasn't quite right.
Yeah, the worst is after you interview someone for the first time, then the next fight, you text them, and they're like, "I hope they didn't think I was an ass because this is really going to tell if they don't answer this time."
Yeah, exactly. You hope that the first time it goes well enough, and even like the first time you don't have the same kind of relationship. Like once you kind of get an idea who this fighter is, when you talk to him the second time, you can see how it's different. And then, but obviously if they don't answer your question, like you think you'd be down for an interview, red. Oh, damn. All right. Well, I guess that tells me what I need to know.
Yeah, yeah, that I'd prefer the fight not even have the red on because I'm like, oh, maybe you got a new number, I don't have it or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, nah, if they leave you on red, or you can do what I have and you get a Kevin Holland that tells you straight up, and then that becomes like that becomes your fun interaction of a fighter story, and then it's like, you hope it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I don't have any fight. I've had a few managers that say, well, the one that everyone knows, like there's one manager that isn't too fond of a lot of people in the media that I was blocked for a couple of months. I could be blocked right now. I have no clue.
What have you ever had a situation where like somebody tells you not to talk about a certain topic, like before the interview, they're like really adamant about like don't talk about this?
Not really, just Khalil Roundtree. Like he's just
Yeah.
that's the one I always go to because I remember at the first time I talked to him, he gets on Skype and he's like, "Yeah, but I don't want to talk about my fight." I'm like, "Oh, I would have liked the heads up before I scheduled this because now what the heck am I going to talk about?"
So was this back when you were still like writing down questions, or was that at a point where you could have been able to come up with something off the top of your head?
Well, that's when I was at could have come up like off the top of my head, but there's still the usual questions I ask. Then when he says I don't want to talk about my fight, and then it's kind of like just scrambling, like, well, what the heck do I even have you on for? Because I can't write up something not about your fight that's just like, oh, he likes to do this on his weekends. Like no one cares.
This was before what fight?
Well, it was in the lead up to the Anders one, the
Oh,
him
okay.
going up to Thailand. He didn't even want to talk about why he was going out there or anything. And I'm like, oh, well, this is fun.
Man, first time I ever talked to Khalil Roundtree, and this was, when I was in France, like obviously you have like a big time zone issue. And then when I first started, I was the guy like whatever time you told me, I was gonna make it happen. It didn't matter. Obviously, I don't do that anymore. But before it was like they were like, yeah, he wants to use in Pacific time, wants to do it at the end of the day. The interview ended up being at 4 a.m. my time, and I had school the next day. But I was like, oh, Khalil Roundtree, I'm gonna do it, and I regret it because it got posted to Reddit and people went in on me. Like, I woke up 15 minutes before the interview, had my questions, and you can see it, like face is swollen, eyes are not looking great, hair was a mess. Everybody was going in, and I was like, all right, I'm not doing that anymore. Like Khalil was cool, but there's no way I'm getting up at 4 a.m. to do this anymore. Not when people came after me like that.
I haven't had any of that. I've had a few staying up till like 1 a.m. just because like I want to talk to like Whitaker or those guys out there because that's like I don't even know the time change. That'd be like 10 a.m. for them. I'm like, oh, I guess I can do that. I'll just have to make sure I don't fall asleep by 2 a.m. Hopefully, I can get it done.
Well, that's the thing, and now that you do it on video too, like, over the phone, like, even if you're a little lethargic, like, it's
Yeah.
fine, but now, over video, like, and I struggle with this, but you have to be excited, you know what I mean? If you're on the verge of, "I'm about to fall asleep," like, you have to do everything you can, "Oh, man, I need to try to make it as exciting as I can."
Yeah, I could get away with a lot of stuff on the like, if I could do some late ones where I'd just be lying in my bed, I'm like, I can't be doing that anymore. But they didn't know where I was talking from. Like, I would just pick up the phone, have the recorder next to my bed, and when it was done, I just fall over to sleep. I'm like, this is late for me.
That's crazy. That's how I was doing it in France too. It's like, when I first started, like I needed like my desk set up right, phone here, this, there, and you're like sweating and you're like, all right, let's do it. Now today it's like you'll get a text like 5 minutes before the interview, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to go get ready for this. Like it's crazy how different like you do enough of them and it almost doesn't feel like a big deal anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you switched to video, right? Like you're doing things with BJ Penn, you're doing your show and everything. Why the switch to video?
That was just something they wanted. They wanted a show out there, so I said they just asked me if I could do it. I'm like, I could probably figure out video enough. So it's definitely nowhere near the level of a lot of people in this. I'm far from a video editor. In school, I hated video editing. I don't really get it. I can basically cut a clip. So if they lose their connection for like a minute, I basically know how to just cut that minute out. Other than that, I'm not too good at it.
Were you nervous about like, putting your face on camera and like you have to be a host now. Like you have to come up with an intro and shit. Like were you nervous about all that stuff?
At the beginning, I was. Then after the first like two times, I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? They just say I look like an idiot. Who cares?
That was the thing when I went on MMA World, like, I'd never been in front of that gigantic
Yeah,
of an audience, and it's like, you think, like, every worst case scenario of, like, shit people could say to you, they would come up with it. They were finding everything, like, I'd get in the comments section because people say don't look at it, but I can't help it. I wanna see what people think, and, oh my god, people were like, "How come fighters are talking to this child?" And, "Why is this 12-year-old talking to" yeah, and I got TJ Dillashaw right there, like, "Why is this 12-year-old talking to a champion?" And they were finding everything. People were like, you sound like Henry Cejudo, and then you're the whole rest of the day like, oh my god, do I really sound like Henry Cejudo? Am I a child? And it was like, by the time I left MMA World, you have to rebuild your confidence. People came at you for everything you could think of.
yeah, that's a big platform too. There
Yeah.
was probably hundreds of comments, and then if it gets on Reddit, Reddit is ruthless.
Man, Reddit, like, it's cool because it'll hike up your views,
Yeah,
but you gotta be ready for that one, man. Because people, they'll find whatever. Like, my Mike Davis interview, for some reason, is blowing up. Fuck, man, the comments on that one, oh my god. Like, I asked him at the beginning of the interview because he was water loading. So I was like, "How's the bathroom situation?" Like, "Are you peeing a lot?" And, one commenter was like, "How's the bathroom situation?" "Same as your interview." Shit. I was like, "Oh my god. That's clever, but damn, like, just coming after me like that. I didn't ask for none of this."
yeah. People like are mean on Reddit. They got some good like. I'm like, I wonder how long that took for you to come up with because that's a good line that I don't think I could ever think of.
Man, but, Reddit, I'm one of those people, I feel like everybody on the internet's my age, and then, like, if you look at, the stats, you realize, like, it's 30-year-olds, 40-year-old like, I'm like, how weird is that, people that much older than me are talking about me, and then you realize some of it's jealousy too, like, why is this child talking to fighters and I can't even get a follow back on Twitter?
Yeah, I don't even go on Reddit. I don't understand. Like, I probably should use it to promote some stuff, but I don't get it. Everything always says like, "Oh, you can't post this link or something," and they're like, "Oh, you posted your same link." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm not gonna post some random one." Like, I was only using it like basically as my Twitter just to post my stuff, and I'm like, I got banned because I posted like two of my same links back to back, and they're like, "Oh, you gotta separate or something." I'm like, honestly, Reddit's not for me.
Yeah, it is too much, man. So I talked to Jeff Neal, right? I mean, you saw this, and I was asking him, like, who are some of your go-to interviewers? Because he has, like, I guess, people that were there from the start, and that's it. And he says Cole Shelton. So I was like, oh shit, Cole's getting that recognition. I sent it to you. Are you starting to get more and more of that recognition? Like, is your name something that fighters are becoming really familiar with?
I think so. There's some fighters I've talked to for a while. A lot of the Fortis guys,
Yeah.
like Randy Costa, I'll talk to all the time. There's some people are still like, oh, sure, and then I'll talk to them, and they're like, good talking to you, and then they're like, oh, I've talked to you before. I'm like, oh, well, okay, but I think it is. I hope it is at least. I hope it's getting more. My name's going out there more.
That was the thing. I talked to Diego Lima recently, and I told him for the interview, I was like, "My guy, you're great because I've texted you from like 4 different phone numbers, And every time you've answered me, and even if you weren't sure who I was, like you at least acted like you knew who I was. And he was like, yeah, I like doing interviews with you. And it's silly, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, all of a sudden like the shoulders go a little bit higher and you're like, nice doing interviews with me. But you never know, like, do fighters know who you are, or do you have to reintroduce yourself every single time you try to talk to them?
Yeah, there's some fighters where if I'm texting them and I'm not sure they'll remember, I'll always say like, "Hey, it's Cole Shelton, like the
Yeah.
writer for whatever site I'm doing it for. I wonder if you want to do another interview." Or if there's some, I'll just be like, "Hey, you down for an interview?" Like
Yeah.
Jeff Neal, I'll just text. Jeff Neal kind of knows, like, say the Randy Costa, Diego Ferreira, like they're just kind of expecting the text like within that 3 weeks before the fight. I'll hit them up, but there's definitely some I think that I know me. There's some that just text me, not even about fighting, just randomly. But there's definitely the others where they're like, I don't even remember you at all.
That I always joke about this, but Julian Marquez, like we've done a couple interviews, and every single time I text him, if I don't reintroduce myself, I get a, "Who is this? How'd you get my phone number? What do you want?" And it's like, Julian, like we've I've talked to you before you got to the UFC. What is this? Like, have we not built a relationship?
Yeah, there's I haven't had that luckily, but yeah, I've definitely probably been where I text some people with my name and they're probably like, I don't remember who you are.
That's the thing, right? Because you remember it, like you have like I talked to this guy for these fights and stuff like that, and then you might ask the fighters, and it's like, oh, I have no clue who that is, but I guess if he wants to do media, we can. It's like, ah, you really hope like they know your name and not just like what outlet you're with.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, when I was at Flow Combat, nobody knew my name. It was just Flow Combat guy. You know what I mean? It was, oh, that dude from Flow. And I left Flow Combat, and then it's like, I wasn't, you knew me as the Flow Combat guy. Now I'm not the Flow Combat guy. And then, it was just like, it was like a brand thing. Like, stop with the Flow Combat guy. Like, I have like a real name behind it.
Yeah, there's so many people that probably just think I'm with one place, and then I post it on another site. They're like, "Wait, I thought it was going up on this one." I'm like, I, like someone else on that site already talked to you. Like, I'm not gonna do the same interview in the same site twice. Like, I had to move somewhere else.
Speaking of which, have you had that issue of, because you talk to a ton of guys, like, have you had that issue of like, you got to try to find the website where they haven't talked to them? 'Cause if you talk to everybody, chances are, whatever website you're with, they've probably talked to them as well.
Not really. Could be Japan. I'm like really the only one doing interviews there, so it's just kind of left to me. People will say like, "Oh, have you talked to this person?" I'm like, "No, go ahead." And then if I end up thinking I want to talk to them, I'll just post it somewhere else. But I know like you would probably have that problem more than me with Miami News because they're freaking Eric has so many people on that site doing interviews, which is so good for good for the site though.
Oh, for sure. When I was at Sure Dog, you were that guy for me. Like every time I was doing an interview, I was like, like you knew there were two guys that were gonna talk to those fighters. It was either I was gonna talk to him, you were gonna talk to him. Every time I had to check, like on the sheet, like did
Yeah,
Cole talk to him? 'Cause there's a good chance Cole got him before I did. It was pretty crazy, like trying to figure out, like, who can I talk to if this guy's already got him.
yeah. Luckily, I don't have that problem now. I don't even tell them who I'm talking to. It's kind of for a lot of the staff. It's like, oh, this is who's on Cole's show this week. That's cool. They got him.
Yeah, I always forget to do it. I'll do interviews and stuff, and then I have to check, like, did other people talk to him? And I guess some people might see it like, look at this douchebag just interviewing whoever he wants, posting it without saying anything. But I always forget, like, oh yeah, say something to somebody. Because most of the time, I'm not even telling fighters who I'm with. Like the guys that know me, it's just like, you down for an interview? Yeah, let's do it. And then you try to figure out, like, did someone at my MMA News talk to him, or can I just do it for the scrap?
Yeah. How's that work for you? Like, does Eric? Do you have to send Eric a message? Be like, hey, I want to talk to this guy.
I should. That's what I should do. No, I went on Facebook the other day, and they kicked me out of the group chat too because they thought I left. So that was like the wake up call of, get your head out of your ass, do these interviews again. But no, I was like, let me put up a message of who I talked to, and I didn't realize how many people I talked to until I started listing it out, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. The way it should work is I should say something in the group like, hey guys, I'm talking to these people, and then if somebody already talked to them, then I'll just give them to the scrap. But I just do my own thing, play by my own rules, and probably piss off a lot of people along the way.
Yeah.
I feel like the person that will have the biggest issues with it would be James Lynch, because you
Oh,
want to talk about someone who's talked to every single fighter. Like, how sometimes I'm like, how do you not just have leftover interviews? Because like you really, when you talk to everybody, like there's going to be people that have hit that fighter before.
yeah. Because you look at his playlist. His playlist, it's literally like probably like 80% of the fighters on the card you talk to. The ones that are like, you could just tell the non-English speaking ones, it's like, oh yeah, those are the only people on the card James didn't talk to.
And he might have managed to get like a
I know.
translator or something to make it happen. It's like even them, it's like, oh man.
I I've only done one where I need a translator. That was with Patricio Pitbull before his fight against who was it? Carvalho, and I had a translator on. And I'm like, man, this really sucks. I'm like, good thing it's on the phone because James does all like the fancy editing where like the English is speaking while like
Yeah.
the mouth talking. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So it would just be a long video where it'd be like, I asked the question, Patricio would answer, and then I'd have to wait for the translation. I'm like, good thing this is on phone where I can just fast forward a lot of this.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's really difficult too, right? Because it's like, how can you edit it so that it still looks good and it sounds good and it's tough because the translator might speak less than the fighter did too. So that's why for translator, I haven't even bothered with it because I'm like, it's going to be so much work that I just don't see how I can make it look good. James has figured it out. I know in France, like if somebody's speaking English, like for example on the news, you can hear him speaking English a little bit, but then they'll have the translator over it. So I'm like, maybe that's the way to go. But it's so complicated that unless you might as well just write an article and just transcribe it, which is, one of the worst things in the world. But, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, transcribing is probably my. I hate every second of it. Every single time I do it, I'm like, why do I do this? Why do I interview people? I'm done. Especially the long ones where they're just like you get like a 5 minute answer and you're just typing because then they talk a lot faster than you can type. Then you have to pause it. Then you have
Yeah.
to go back to like, wait, did I hear that right? Then you got to go back. I'm like, this only 5 minute answer is taking me like 30 minutes to freaking transcribe.
Oh man, when I was at Flow Combat doing just like the written features, I would transcribe the entire interview, which would take forever. Like you run out of steam. Like you do that so many times, and then I want to use every single quote, and then finally somebody had to kind of sit me down, like, hey man, nobody gives a fuck about every quote. Like you got to find like what's gonna really make your article, because otherwise you're doing so much work. But transcribing is the work. It's a big reason I went to video because transcribing like it's horrible. And then even transcribing services, they don't even transcribe the right thing. Like you don't even know like what they just it's like what are you writing? So it's I feel like I could harp on how bad it is for like 3 hours.
Yeah, that I hate every second of it. Like I haven't even tried any of the transcribing things that where you like plug it in. So I'm like, I don't even trust it. Where then I'll have to go over it anyways, and I'm like, then why am I paying them if I have to go over it all the time again? So I just do it, suck it up. But I hate it.
Well, that's the thing too. Like for a long time, I was just like, I'm not transcribing. You can't make me do it. I was just releasing the video. And then the other day, I had someone hit me up like, "Hey man, I want to use the quotes from your interviews, but could you write them up? Could you give me a transcript?" And I was like, fuck it. So I did it, and they used the quotes, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to transcribe it if I want people to use those quotes and the videos and stuff to get more views. But I escaped it for so long, and now it's back. Now it's here. It's like, Lucas, you thought you could run away. Like, where did that bring you? Right back to me.
Yeah, it sucks.
But so are you getting a lot of people picking up your interviews? Like I feel like you work with so many websites and stuff. Like people must be starting to take quotes and using them on some of the bigger sites.
Yeah, I've had quite a bit, especially when I talk to like some people or a lot of people don't get. Like whenever I talk to Dan Lambert, all those get picked up because talking about like Masvidal, what he thinks, all that stuff. There'll be a fair bit where I'll get some big names. Like I got Francis Ngannou. I remember like this was like 2 months after he knocked out Rosenstrike, and the whole thing was John Jones just vacated. So I was like that first person to get him. So that was everyone kind of picked up that, but it's definitely cool when you see the big sites pick up your quotes.
How was Francis Ngannou when you interviewed him? I've talked to him twice a long time ago, but how's he been with you recently when you talked to him?
I talked to him twice. Well, yeah, twice, and it was just like his manager just emailed me because I'm close to his manager, and he just said, "I'm with Ngannou right now. You want to call me?" And I'm like, "Oh, that was literally the first time I ever talked to him." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." Like, wasn't prepared for this, but I guess I got to do it. But there's good thing it's only been video or a phone video. I think I'd be a bit intimidated if I saw him just like his facial reactions to some question. I'd be like, "Oh, I asked the wrong question there."
Oh, Francis, first time I talked to him was like after the Overeem knockout, just before he was fighting Stipe. So that was a sweet spot where he's on top of the world and he's like happy about everything. The interview goes really well. Second time I talked to him was before the Derek Lewis fight, and I called him from my because he won't do video, so I called him with my phone number when I was in France, and he picks up the phone. And he's talking in French, and I was like, "Hey, this is Lucas from Flow Combat," and he was like, "Why the fuck are you talking to me in English?" And I was like, "Oh my god, who is this Francis I just called?" And I was like, the interview's in English. He's like, "Yeah, but you're French." I feel you. Like I hear you, but the article is not going to be in French. And Oh, that interview, like, I don't know what Francis picked up, but that man was on a mission. I was like, "Are you and Derek Lewis beefing?" And he's like, "What? Are we supposed to be friends or something? Am I gonna buy him dinner?" I was like, "No, I mean, there's like a in between like beefing and buying him dinner too." Like he surprised me. That was the expression he had time today. Francis had time today. He wasn't playing. I was shocked last time I talked to him, but I was shocked by the Francis that popped up. That was not the Francis that came off that Overeem win.
Yeah, and you can tell when some fighters when you get them because everyone has bad days. You can tell them when it just happened. You schedule this thing like a week at like before, and you'd get them on a bad day, and it's like, this is gonna be great. You just tell by that first question.
Right. I talked to one fighter. I don't want to say who it was, but when it gets released and you watch, it'll be really obvious. But they were very dry. Like the first question, I'm trying to ask something fun, and their answer was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, okay." You're like this kind of interview. Like, if we're gonna do 10 minutes, it's gonna be because I asked a lot of questions, not because the questions were any good. I was like, "Okay, that's what we're doing." Like, it can be tough, man. Some fighters are so dry. And sometimes it's their fault. Sometimes that's just how they are. But it makes the interview tough when they're not ready to talk really.
So person that I've had the hardest time, but I actually love talking to her is Hannah Cyphers
Oh yeah.
because it's so challenging, but I like it because it makes me like think of so like our call will literally be like 6 minutes long, but I would have asked like 35 questions.
Yeah. Man, you and James Lynch are like that. You guys both like that. I can't do it, man. Like I would feel like at the end, like that will crush me. Like, because you pride yourself on maybe doing interviews with me is a little bit more fun or whatever. But with her, no matter how fun it is, like that by the end of the interview, it's like God, did I really force her to do 6 minutes with me? I wouldn't be able to take that mentally.
It's it definitely sucks. Like you don't get the best quotes. Like it's like, this. I just start putting quotes together with. I'm just like, this is basically the same thing. It's just like four questions later. So I just start putting it together. But I'm like, I remember talking to her with her coach by her side. Her coach, I hear in the background, is like, "Oh, talk about this, talk about this." Like, I'm like, if he wasn't there, I would have literally had like 2 word answers. But like, I was lucky that the coach was beside her because he obviously knew what she was like without interviews. And so he's like nudging her. He's like, "Oh, but we did this in training. Talk about this." I'm like, "Oh, you are the best."
Sounds like a parent. It sounds like a parent, like, tell them about your drawing, tell them about what you did in
Yeah,
school. But it's a good thing he was there because some fighters don't quite understand, like, what's the purpose of those interviews.
yeah. Like, I think some fighters just you can tell they're not into it, and their like manager set it up. They're like, "Oh, you got to do this," and they're like, "Oh, you couldn't care less be there." There's some people that are literally like, "Oh, I like doing interviews. Like that's I like talking to people about fighting and stuff." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's good because then you know it's going to be a good one."
I know James Litch with her, his strategy was go the farming route. She likes farming, so he'll ask her farming questions to warm her up. Have you gone that route, or did you find something a little bit different?
I did not go the farming route. I would just talk about just. I'd start off with nothing to do with fighting, just about what she was doing. Like if I talked about like money, like oh, what you doing your weekend, just like basic. I will never use those quotes in the interview just see if she'd be like, oh, it's just a normal conversation. I can start talking about it more. But I think like she is just so nervous, which a lot of people would get. Like I think if you start talking to a lot of people just throw microphones in your face, a lot of people I think would freeze like that. So I can't blame her. It's definitely fun. I like it though, trying to talk to her.
I know I was talking to Lauren Murphy on the podcast, and at some point she told me she was like, a lot of fighters are kind of scared to be on camera and do interviews. And I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking like, at one point I was terrified to talk to you guys. It's like, are you really scared to talk to me? But I don't think she meant me specifically. I strongly doubt talking to a child is what would have would have intimidated people.
Yeah, I think the first time you probably get on camera, if you're a fighter with like an aerial or something like that, I feel like that would probably be nerve wracking. It's like there's going to be hundreds of thousand people watching this. If I say something stupid, like there are gonna be people coming for me for like months.
Yeah, but I feel like what Ariel does well is that like he knows how to sort of make you feel comfortable. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like he's sort of like, I'm your friend when you're on this broadcast, like it's you and me. But it's what you have to do as an interviewer too, is you sort of have to make people forget like all the eyeballs that are on you and just kind of focus on the person you're talking to.
yeah, 100%. Like if they get comfortable with you, it goes a lot better.
For sure. What's like the most hoops you've had to jump through to book an interview? Like by the end of it, you almost didn't want to do it, but you finally got it. Like they made you do so much.
Uh, the Aussie guys and like the New Zealand guys, those ones always sucks. They're like, oh, I can do like noon my time. I'm like, well, that's like 3:30 in the morning for me. Like, I don't really want to get up at 3:30. And then there's some like that. There's some where I hate it when I'll schedule something and they just don't answer the call or whatever. Then they're like, "Oh, can you do? How about we do it in 2 hours?" I'm like, "I got another interview in 2 hours." Then they get mad that they're like, "Oh, but this one I was open." I'm like, "Yeah, but you were scheduled like 3 hours ago. Like I don't keep a whole 3 hour time slot in case you're late." So, like I won't book interviews back to back. Like
Yeah.
I'll give like normally I don't do many like there's a lot more people do a lot more interviews. Like the most I'll have a day is probably three and they'll be spread out throughout the day where if someone's late doesn't matter. But there's sometimes where like the managers will hit me up and they're like, all right, we got to do this person at 1, this person at 1:30. I'm like, well, hopefully that guy at 1 is not late because then it's going to screw up everything.
I had one day, that was 2019. I came back from France from, being in America on vacation. I was like, listen, I'm going to come back with a bang. I'm going to try to book as many as I could. I had six. And it was really like back to back to back. Like you close your sky, boom, next person. And it was like, I'm in there. I'm like, if one person's late, you derailed the entire train. I was exhausted by the end of it because, you got to act fresh and brand new for every interview. But by the end of it, nobody was late, which is a miracle because every time, like, hey, can you give me 10 minutes? Like, oh God, 10 minutes. That's our interview length, man. 10 minutes. Like, yeah, I have a whole train of people. But yeah, it's tough to do back to back. But if everybody's on time and it goes smoothly, like you just did all that content in like under an hour.
Yeah, there's James Lynch does all those. Like he does a stupid amount every day, and I'm like, I don't get how you do that.
Oh, for sure. And then, he has like energy throughout all of them. I feel like you'd get to like the 17th interview, and by then it's like, yeah, I mean, my guest, I already did this. Like people talk about, we get the same questions every time. We kind of have to ask you the same question every time too. So by the end of it, it's like, and here we go, same answer about how you like the matchup. I mean, it's a lot of work doing that.
Yeah, it's difficult for sure. I That's why I hate doing back. Like I would rather just like one interview a day and just keep it moving. Because luckily I don't have to do as many. I probably do like 4 for every card, which isn't that many compared to a lot of people. But where so then if I do a 4 card, like I'll just spread it out. Where like this week I'll make it about like 258, for example. Like I'm nah, that's gonna be like 2 weeks later. But I'll just say like this week, anyone on that card, this is when I'm talking to them, and just try to get it out where then I don't have a bunch in the same day.
So speaking of this big pay-per-view, have you gotten anyone from the pay-per-view or did you try to get some of the bigger names? Like I know I've seen some people manage to snag Michael Chandler and stuff, but Dan Hooker, I know he got more difficult to book as well. And Dustin did a few. Like, did you manage to get any of those big names?
I got Dan Hooker. Chandler was we were talking back and forth. He's like, "Oh, I should have some time." Then when that day came up, he's like, "Sorry, UFC booked me with so much stuff." I'm like, "Okay, whatever." Other than that, like the pay per view, I only got what Hooker, Matt Frivola, just because I talked to Frivola all the time. But I had the Wednesday card. I had a lot. It's weird. So some pay per views, I have no problem getting like people. Like I remember 252. I had like JDS, Sean O'Malley. Like I had all those guys. But then the next pay per view, I'm like struggling to get anyone. I'm like, how do I go from getting all these top guys where I can't even then get like a prelim guy? I'm like, it's so weird. Just like the worst is when I have like the normal people I talk to and they're all on the same card. I'm like, well, I don't want to make my show like 8 people, but I want to talk to all you guys. Then what do I do?
Oh man, this card, like Dan Hooker and Israel Adesanya were guys that I used to talk to before every single one of their fights. So I was getting them through their coach, and then Israel brought in like a manager, and I guess Dan Hooker went to do something in management, and all of a sudden it was like boom, booking them were impossible. And then you try to explain to people like they know who I am, but Dan Hooker was one of those guys. Like I feel like he's kind of cut off a lot of like some of the interviews. Like at one point he used to do everyone, and now it seems like everyone who gets them, like they really have to like do a lot in order to book them. Like, were you able to book them pretty easily?
Yeah, just through his new manager, but I don't really know how I got his number somehow. I don't actually. That's a common thing. Is I'm like, I have your number, but I'm not really sure how I got it. But we'll just send a message and see what happens. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, we got to. Dan's available like tomorrow." And he's like, "After that, he's gonna be really busy. You're probably not gonna get him." So all the meetings with Dan, I think, probably took place in the same day. I know
Right.
mine did because he we're both talking to him while he's in the car. So he probably went from talking to me or talking to James first, hanging up, then getting on with the other one of us in his car. I
Yeah.
got it on after James because he got to his gym at the end of our conversation. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's smart though. If you want to travel like 40 minutes, you might as well just bang out some interviews quick. Like, what else are you gonna do? You're in the car anyways.
For sure. Like, are you liking Dan Hooker, like the way he is with the media? Like, I watched a video today where they sort of took some of his interviews. I think it was called like Dan Hooker being confident, and they were like grabbing sort of some of his quotes and stuff. Are you liking him as an interview?
Yeah, he's a funny guy to talk to. Even like before we were started recording, like he's just saying some stuff, and I'm like, I could hang out with you and have some drinks. Like you'd be a funny guy to just to hear some stories because I feel like he'd have some good stories too.
Well, those guys from like New Zealand, Australia, like they're so chill. You know what I mean? Like you feel like even Dan Hooker was like, I'm scared to be at the press conference with Conor McGregor. It's like you're
Yeah,
from New Zealand, like just call him a cunt or something, and everybody's gonna love it. Like I wouldn't be worried about you.
yeah. I think I'd be more worried if I was like a Chandler who I don't even know if Connor knows who he is. Like, is Connor watching Bellator? I'm not too sure. Other than like when Gallagher's fighting or Dennis, like, does he really know who that is? Like, that I would be scared if I was Chandler. I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm getting into here.
Oh yeah, and especially Chandler's one of those guys that thinks he's witty, but it doesn't matter how like witty you think you are. When you're in front of Conor McGregor, that's a whole
Yeah.
different story. Like you think you're witty, this guy's out. Look at Jeremy Stevens, got obliterated out of nowhere. I don't think anybody was expecting that, and now forever you're gonna be who the fuck is that guy? Like it must be pretty terrifying to be up on that stage with him. You're in his division, and it's like, God, don't give him any kind of ammo, and you're gonna do it whether you mean to or not.
Jeremy Stevens' line is actually a good one because Connor was thinking about who the hardest division hitter is, and he's like, "I'm up here. I'm just gonna throw my name out, see what happens. See if I can get a fight eventually." And then he's just like, "Oh, I probably shouldn't have said myself."
But you know what? Good on Jeremy Stevens for getting a picture with Conor McGregor's mother, though. Like,
Yeah,
you know what? Like that, it came really late. I think it was like 2 years later. But you know what? Good for you for putting some kind of like, if you were to sort of keep track of the points, like you have some points on the board. You know what I mean? You're not at zero. So good for you for getting something done.
and a lot of people are on zero with Connor and his like. There's some things where like if someone said that to me, I'd be like, I don't even know how to answer. And you're just supposed to answer like right after he says something. I'd be like, I'm thinking on this one. Like I have no clue what to say.
But if they ask you like who the fuck, like how, what can you say? Like you're gonna sound like an idiot trying to justify yourself. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I knocked out RD. Like don't give out your resume. Like you just gotta be confident. But either way, you're gonna look like crap trying to say anything. But there's no right answer. Just sit there and eat it and just hope that people forget.
Yeah, and that clip though, that is literally any single McGregor fight week. I always see it on Twitter. I'm like, this is just all like that. It will never go away. That one.
Well, I knew it was a problem when I started seeing the picture of Jeremy Stevens holding the mic and the McGregor and stuff. When I started seeing it outside of MMA, like when I like on my Facebook, I don't have a whole lot of MMA stuff. But when I started seeing people that don't know MMA using that meme, I was like, oh boy, like that's a problem. You just crossed over, and that is not a good thing.
Yeah, there's some where some of my friends don't even follow me, and they'll like post something about it, and I'm like, that's how you know it got big when they don't even know who the guy is. Either of them are, and they're using it.
The worst for me was when Israel fought, and everybody was on Facebook who, I knew for a fact didn't know what UFC was or anything. And they're sitting there hyping him up and saying facts that were all wrong. And like I had to fight, like trying to explain to everyone everything under the comments. You're like, let this go. People were like, this brother from Detroit. It's like, no, none of that is correct. Like he's not from Detroit. Like that. And you just have to like bite your, like, it's not worth it. Like, what am I going to gain from trying to explain to these people? It's like, let that one go.
Yeah, you can't really argue with people. Those are the worst people to argue with. They think they know everything, and it's like I know you're wrong, but they're so far into it, thinking they're right that they just keep on going with it. I'm like, all right, sure.
Oh, that was the word. Like, you're at Buffalo Wild Wings with your friends, and like, what's happening. Like, we were watching this fight, and I was like, I know what's happening because I'm like I'm aware of it, and they're trying to explain stuff to me, and like everything inside is like, tell them about the footwork, tell them about the feints. You're like, let it go, man. You think you understand what's happening? That's fine. Like, well, I am not gonna argue with you because there's no point. And then you're just gonna look like that guy, like, oh, because you've talked to Israel before, you're gonna explain to us the fight. Like, nah, it's not worth it.
No, I know. And there's some people where like I remember that was actually on my birthday, that fight. So I had some of my friends over and they just saw Costa and they're like, oh, he's gonna win. And I'm like, I'll bet all of you guys. I'm like, I got so much flack in my breakdowns I do for like the betting site where I said I don't think this fight's gonna be close. I'm like, I don't see a way how Costa wins. And there are people tweeting at me saying like, oh, wait till Costa knocks him out. I can't wait to screenshot this. I'm like, I don't think this is going to be a close fight. I think Izzy styles on him. And that's exactly what he did. He styled on him. Like, there was, Costa did not have a single moment in that fight. And my friends are like, oh, Costa's going to win. Wait till he connects once on Adesanya. I'm like, okay. Like, Adesanya has been hit a lot. He doesn't really go down. So I don't see this guy beating him. And then there's just some people that are casual fans, they just look at people and they're like, oh, that guy's going to win. I'm like, okay.
I mean, yeah, I get it. Like you're built like a Greek god or whatever, but at the same time, like when you can really appreciate what Israel does, you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, like like he's not gonna get sucked into some silly, like it's gonna take some high level striking to get him to make a mistake. Like people are always like, you got knocked out in kickboxing, like yeah. And the guy trained stand up only. Like, you know what I mean? Like obviously, if it was gonna happen, it's gonna happen there and not necessarily against a guy like Costa, where, and we saw in that fight, the difference in the striking.
Yeah, 100%.
So we got Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier. I got in an argument with Shaq at Fightful when I was doing the live stream with our picks. Who do you have in that fight? I'm sure you're gonna do a breakdown and stuff, but real quick, like who you have in that fight?
I have McGregor. I think he knocks him out early. Like, I think second. I was predicted second round in my thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets him out there in the first.
That's what I had too. Like, I was hearing people say like, "Oh, Dustin Poirier," and then it's like, I get that Dustin's a good guy and you like Dustin, but what did you see stylistically that made you confident? Like the two guys that beat Connor off the top of my head, like they were known for what? Having decent hands and a great ground game. And like, you really think of Dustin Poirier as like a wrestler guy that's going to take you down? Like, I feel like that kind of fed into the kind of style Connor likes. You're going to stand with him and, he's got a much better, I feel like his chin is better than it was before, but he's still very much capable of getting knocked out.
And look at Poirier versus Hooker, Gaethje, Pettis, Alvarez. What's the common thing? He gets hit and he gets hit a lot.
Yeah.
Can you take those shots from Connor? Because history shows Connor just needs to land one or two and you're out. Like, he doesn't need a whole lot. If you're getting hit that much, like, it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people were like, "Yeah, but he got better," and I feel you. He got better, and
Yeah.
so is he gonna fare better than last time? Maybe, but at the same time, bro, like you get hit with that big of a shot, and even the fight against Michael Johnson, like you look at that one, it's like if Michael Johnson was able to put you out, and I know it was a while ago, but it should tell you it's still very much capable of happening.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think people now don't like Connor, where they're paying. Like, I saw so many people picking Cowboy Cerrone against him. I'm like, how does Cerrone win? They're like, oh, he takes him down and submits him. I'm like, you guys don't give Connor enough credit for his grounding. Like, he stuffed Habib's takedowns. How many people stuff a Habib takedown? Maybe a couple of them that's fought him. Like Donald Cerrone's not going to take this guy down. Like, I can tell you that.
But it's not their game either. Like people act like fighters are gonna have like a specific game plan for Connor. Like if you're already moving away from your game just to beat a guy, like you've got a problem because you're not gonna be as good as you would be if you stuck to your own game. And even Cerrone, like you look at that fight and you're like, Connor's left-handed or left-footed
Yeah.
or whatever you want to say. And Cerrone notoriously has issues with his liver and stuff. Like you feel like you kind of have a cheat code regardless. Like if for whatever reason he turns into Habib, like you have a path to victory if you really wanted it.
And that's what I mean. I think Connor has gotten to the point where you either love him or you hate him. I think a lot of people do hate him just because, people always go, but he never defended his belt and just that kind of thing. I'm like, who really cares? Like the guy, who did you really care to see him defend his belt against someone at featherweight when he beat most of everyone at featherweight? Like he cleaned out that whole division for you and got the belt. Like he already beat Mendez, he beat Poirier, he beat Holloway. Like who was he really going to fight? Or would you rather see those fights against Diaz and Alvarez and then Floyd Mayweather? Like, he doesn't really matter to him to defend his belt. He's just in it for getting big paydays, and people are going to watch regardless.
That's why it's crazy to me now that you see him taking the fights like the Cowboy, like the Poirier. Like I felt at one point you needed like some sort of gimmick, right? Like Diaz beat him and Habib was the champion. And now you're seeing him take these pay-per-view headliners with nothing on the line. And it's almost weird. Like it's weird to me to think he took on Cowboy a year ago. Like you look at that fight and you're like, that had no storyline. Like it was just, I think Cowboy called him McNuggets or something at a press conference. Like, what was the storyline there?
Yeah, I know. That's what I never got. I think it was just Connor knew he could win and probably win in highlight reel fashion, where he's like, I got to remind everyone that I'm still here and just get a win. I think he kind of feels like the same thing with Poirier. If like any McGregor promo or interview you see right now is I'm going to knock this guy out in the first round. Like, and normally Connor's predictions are pretty close to happening. Like he said Aldo in the first round. I think he said Alvarez like a round later, but it could have been stopped the round before. Like the guy is very good with picking how his fights end.
I was watching some of the media he did, not too much, because you know what a Conor McGregor interview is, Habib this and that. I was surprised to see him get on the podcast with Josh Thompson and Big John McCarthy. I don't know if you saw. I saw that. I was like, I looked at the thumbnail. I was like, what? Like I had to what? I was like, that is the most random like podcast you could have been on. Like I don't know. That was a weird one to me.
Yeah, like you obviously know he's going to talk to Ariel, the Mac life.
Yeah.
And like that, if I had to guess who was talking to him before the fight, I would have literally said only Ariel and the Mac life. I would have been pretty confident only picking those two.
Yeah, like and then Big John, I looked at it, I was like, Big John's a Bellator guy. Josh Thompson's a Habib guy, right? Because he's at the AKA. What is this? And the interview, like, it was fine. I feel like, Connor's he's so good at the media, like he can make any interviewer look good. But that to me, it was like I saw it and I was like, I feel like I have to watch it just because, what the hell is this? Like, what, why? But I wish Connor was a guy that was like accessible, like he'd do interviews with just about anybody. Like that's one of those interviews like you wish you could just get like an opportunity to talk to him, even though like the answers are going to be the same shit every time. But it's just one of those interviews that would be fun to do.
Yeah, I think that's kind of everyone would want to talk to Connor. Regardless, people would be like, "Oh, I don't like Connor." If you got a text or a message from Audiatar and said, "Oh, Connor's available to come on," you're not saying, "Nah, I don't like him." Like everyone's taking that interview.
Yeah, if he was like, be ready in 2 minutes, like you're already scrambling, getting the computer started up, making sure everything looks right. Like it does not matter. Like, and it's not even just a numbers thing. It's just like, that that's not going to be just a regular. Yeah, I'm excited about this fight. Like you're gonna get the funny accent. You're gonna get some really good quotes, whether you want to or not. Like there's so much to like about interviewing a guy like that.
And he's a guy where you could ask a question and he doesn't want to talk about it. He'll just answer totally different questions you never asked just to get some point across that you were never going to ask. He's like, I need this point out, or I'm going to just ramble on about this.
So speaking of which, who's like the bucket list interview? Like if you got a text like, hey man, who's the like hey, you can talk to this fighter right here, right now. Like who would be that bucket list? Like you'd want to sit down and get a chance to talk to him.
Obviously, Connor for sure. One guy is Donald Cerrone. I've never talked to Cerrone. That's a guy that I remember coming home from elementary school and like my dad would watch the Fight Network and I'd watch his like WEC fights. That's kind of how I got into MMA. So that would just be one just because of that. So those two. Who else? I don't know. Those two off the top of my mind would be like, though, like I would cancel anything. Like if I had another interview and they said, "Oh, you can talk to him at like 3:00," I'd be like, "All right, sorry, I can't." I just text that partner, "You got to delay this."
I feel like for me, that guy would be Rampage Jackson. Like I know it's not like the glory like a Connor, but I feel like first of all that would be a challenge. Like Rampage is not going to sit there and play that game of answer the question for the journalist. But every interview he does is so much fun. Like some of the quotes he'll drop sometimes, you're like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, he'd be a funny guy. Like all his cameo videos are on Twitter, and I'm like, it's just hilarious. And what some of the stuff he says.
I feel like John Jones too. I feel like John Jones would be a tough interview, and then obviously he made Luke Thomas famous for the wrong reasons. But John Jones, like you'd either get a great interview, like when he went on Joe Rogan or he went on a walk with Ariel, or you can get the typical like the bullshit. He knows how the media works enough that the interview ends up not being good because he doesn't give you the good answers.
Yeah, there's some fighters that know like I don't have to say anything about like Connor doesn't. Same with John Jones. Adesanya is getting to that level where he could literally just show up and just tweet something on like a Friday, say, "Hey, I'm fighting on pay-per-view tomorrow. Tune in," and they're still going to get like 1 million buys without hyping up anything.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of fighters they get to a certain point where when they don't need to do as much media, they won't. I'm starting to notice that more and more. Like, so there's a lot of like Tyron Woodley. Somebody was telling me like he reached a point where eventually he was like, if the UFC says I have to do it, I'll do it. But anything extra, I ain't doing that.
Yeah, there's some people that I'll message. They're like, other than outside of UFC media, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I guess, I mean, if I had to talk to people all the time, would I really want to do it? Like, if I'm someone just interviewing me every single day, like for 3 hours, like they just get a chunk of your day, I probably would get annoyed too. But there's some fighters where they'll say that, and I'm like, not gonna lie, I think you kind of need to do some more interviews.
Yeah, it's like, man, like you're not the biggest name. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not saying you necessarily have to do it with me, but like,
Yeah,
do some interviews because your fight is flying way under the radar. Like, and that's what the interviews are there for at the end of the day.
yeah. I don't think some fighters realize it that they need to get their name out there, and the best way to do it is do interviews. Some fighters just think, I'm just going to only fight, and my fighting's going to be enough. But the UFC is a business. Your fighting isn't going to be enough all the time.
Listen, before we wrap up this, I'm kind of curious. Like, obviously, you're doing this full time, not MMA full time, because I know you have your stuff. I believe it's with CBC. But what's your goal with this MMA coverage thing? Like, what's the end goal? Like, dreams kind of scenario.
I would like to be full time at one outlet. Obviously, not a slim chance that not a slim chance. There's just not many jobs. Does that happen? I'm if this is what I do for the rest of my life, I'm totally fine at doing it because I actually went to school thinking I was going to cover the MLB. I love watching baseball. I lucky enough I work for places that have credentials to the Blue Jays, so I still go live that part out for a bit, make some money doing that, making money doing MMA. Like if this was my job for the rest of my life, I wouldn't complain. If like a full time place said, "Hey, we'll hire you right now," I'd probably take it because that would be cool just to have one space, going out to events like a bunch, like just all that. But I'm fine if this is it, freelancing forever. But it would be cool definitely to get one outlet full time.
Have you reached that point where you have people that start? I talked to Nolan King a very long time ago, and he was saying like he reached a point where more people were trying to figure out his interest and stuff like that. Have you gotten to that point where you're seeing your name pop up more and more and stuff like that?
Not really. I don't really. I probably should put my name out there more. I don't. I'm probably a problem too, where I don't put it out more. But I would like to, where people are like reaching out to me, asking what I like doing, all that. But I think I'm still pretty new to this, where there's a lot of people probably ahead of me on like sites. If they were to figure out who they'd want to hire, I probably wouldn't be in that top three, top five. But I mean, I am still young, so I still have tons of time, anyways.
That's true. Like, what if like you had the opportunity to have like an in studio show, kind of like an aerial or something like that? Would that be like a way to go, or do you have like an idea, like maybe stay writing the articles or something like that?
I'm always gonna be a writer. I like writing better than going on video, so I'd prefer that. But I think if I had a full time job where it's like you just got to do like a radio or something, I probably would turn it down. I'm like, I don't like. I think writing. Like, that's why I got into it was just writing. I never thought I'd be on video ever. I don't think I could just abandon writing, only do video or only do audio. But that would be something I'd have to consider probably.
Well, video is tough too. Like, people see like, can you? I can't believe Joe Rogan sits down for like 3 hours and a half, 4 hours to do an interview. I'm like, well, it's not even an interview; it's a conversation. But I don't see how you can talk to someone for 4 hours like that. That's crazy to me. Like how some people, or even Ariel, when he was doing those 5 hours, 6 hour long shows, like
Yeah.
it's crazy to me how they're able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, those shows are crazy because what happens if one person declines? Then you just got to make up like 20 minutes of filler. And I'm like, I would struggle so much with that.
Well, did BJ Penn sort of want you to do something live, or were they cool with like you kind of piece stuff together?
No, it was always going to be pieced up like that. It's so hard just to get everything live, to get fighters back to back like that, because then you're dealing with different time zones, different training schedules, and all that. So that they always wanted it like that, just like a pieced up podcast version, and then people can listen to it whenever. But I would struggle with live. I think that would be a lot of pressure. It's like we got to wrap this interview up at like this
Yeah.
time at like 3 o'clock, and then this person has to come on at 3:05. They come on at 3:06. Then this is going to be all delayed stuff. Like I couldn't deal with that pressure.
That's crazy. You have a fighter like that comes off and they're like, "Hey man, you're on air for like 20 minutes waiting for the next guy. Like, entertain the people." Like Shaq did that to me on the live watch along. He was like, "I'm gonna go write an article. Like, can you stall for 10 minutes?" And in your mind, you're like, "Yeah, I can talk for 10 minutes." And then you actually do it, and you're like, "I can talk for like a minute." Like,
Yeah,
what am I gonna talk about for 10 minutes? Like, especially all by yourself like that. That's so tough.
yeah, it is. I envy those people in radio that are like they got 10 minutes of fill at the end of the show and they're just talking, and something went wrong when they have that much time. And I'm like, it's impressive you can keep this going, because after like 30 seconds, I'd look up at the clock and be like, shit, only 30 seconds went by without what I was talking about now.
Or even Luke Thomas when he does his whole sits down and do like an hour and 30-minute live chat. Like I know he's reading questions and stuff, but like that's so crazy to me. Like you sit down by yourself and you just talk throughout the entire thing. It's like and you give your opinions and he seems like he's interacting with people, but he's by himself. That is so crazy to me how people are able to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, listen, man. As we wrap up, I always like to let people sort of plug their stuff and say Safe Saud. I asked him to plug it. He wouldn't do it, but it's like it's my show, man. You got to plug stuff. So I'm gonna let you plug stuff. Like you're not a fighter, you don't have sponsors, but you work at a bunch of outlets. You have social media stuff like that. So if you have things you'd like to plug, now would be the time.
Twitter at Shelton91. I have my show coming out tomorrow. It's Dan Hooker, Michael Chiesa, Matt Frivola, Roxanne Modafferi. And then on BJ Penn, I'll have fighter picks for the main event of 257, and then Hooker Chandler. Anything always, the best way is just on Twitter. I post everything I do on that.
There we go, stacked. I was waiting for like the Nate Diaz, and if anyone from a big outlet is watching me, fucking hire me. Like I'm here. I'll take everything you guys work for, but we're not gonna get anything like that.
No, not today.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Thank you for the people for watching, and we'll see you next time.